The poor rancher risked his life for two Apache sisters. Their chief's decision changed his fate forever. Blood on his hands wasn't unusual for Boone Carter. What was unusual was that it wasn't his own. He stood over the massive mountain lion, its golden eyes now empty, staring at nothing. The beast's claws were still warm, still wet. But the two Apache women behind him weren't running. They weren't screaming. They were just watching him, like they had been expecting this exact moment. Boone's shirt hung in tatters, 3 deep gashes across his chest, still bleeding freely. His makeshift spear, just a broken fence post with a rusted nail, lay bent and useless beside the dead predator. Any reasonable person would have run. Any smart person would have hidden. But Boone Carter had done something that made no sense at all. He had fought a mountain lion with his bare hands and won. The older sister stepped forward, her dark eyes studying his face with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. She said something in Apache to her younger sister, who nodded slowly. Then she looked at Boone and spoke words that would haunt him. "The chief has been waiting for you." Waiting for him. Boone had never met any Apache chief. He'd never even spoken to an Apache before today. But somehow these women acted like they knew exactly who he was. Like this whole thing, the attack, his intervention, even the location had been planned. The younger sister picked up something from the ground near the lion's body, a small carved bone stained with the beast's blood. She held it up to the light, and Boone saw strange markings etched into its surface, symbols he didn't recognize, a language he'd never seen. "This was inside the cat," she said in perfect English, her voice carrying an odd certainty. It was carrying a message, but that was impossible. Mountain lions didn't carry messages. Wild animals didn't deliver carved bones with mysterious symbols. Yet, here it was. Evidence that everything Boone thought he understood about this day was wrong. The older sister touched his wounded chest, her fingers tracing the claw marks with careful precision. 3 cuts, she murmured. Just like the prophecy said. What prophecy? What were they talking about? And why did Boone suddenly feel like he'd stumbled into something much larger than a simple animal attack? Something that had been set in motion long before he'd ever heard the screams echoing across his barren land. Boone's legs trembled as the adrenaline faded, leaving only the burning pain across his chest. The 3 claw marks ran from his left shoulder down to his ribs, deep enough to require stitching. Blood soaked through his torn shirt, dripping onto the dry earth below. "We need to stop that bleeding," the older sister said, stepping closer. She moved with the confidence of someone who had tended wounds before. "I'm Ayanna. This is my sister, Nayeli." Nayeli held the carved bone up to the light again, turning it slowly in her fingers. It was under the cat's body. She corrected herself, glancing at her sister. Must have dropped when she fell. That made more sense. Boone's mind cleared slightly as the shock wore off. The bone wasn't inside the animal. It had simply been beneath the carcass when the mountain lion collapsed. "Someone dropped this here recently." Nayeli continued studying the markings. "These symbols, they're territorial markers. Someone was claiming this land." Ayanna removed a leather pouch from her belt and began pulling out strips of clean cloth. "You saved our lives," she said simply. "We were gathering medicinal plants when she attacked. You didn't have to risk yourself for strangers." Boone winced as she began cleaning his wounds. The pain was sharp, but manageable. "Couldn't just stand there and watch," he muttered. "Most would have," Ayanna replied. "That's why our chief values men like you." "Your chief doesn't know me," Boone said, confusion evident in his voice. The sisters exchanged a look. Nayeli pocketed the carved bone and moved closer. "He knows about you, Boone Carter. Word travels fast about the man trying to make something of that dried-up land to the south." How did they know his name? Boone had lived alone on his struggling ranch for 3 years, barely managing to keep his few cattle alive. He rarely spoke to anyone, let alone Apache families. The drought hit everyone hard, Ayana explained as she worked. Your neighbors gave up and left, but you stayed. You kept working land that everyone said was worthless. Nayeli nodded. Chief Takakoda respects persistence, especially when it's for the right reasons. What would your chief want with a failed rancher? Boone asked. The question carried the weight of 3 years of disappointment, of watching his dreams slowly die under the relentless sun. Ayana finished bandaging his chest and stepped back. Who says you failed? Before Boone could respond, Nayeli pointed toward the horizon. Someone's coming. In the distance, a small group of riders approached. Even from far away, Boone could see they rode in formation, disciplined, purposeful. As they drew closer, he counted 6 men on horseback, their leather clothing and long hair identifying them as Apache. That will be our brother and his men, Ayana said calmly. They were hunting the same cat that attacked us. Boone's stomach tightened. He had just killed a mountain lion on what might be considered Apache hunting grounds. For all he knew, he had interfered with something sacred or violated some territorial agreement. Will there be trouble? He asked. Nayeli smiled for the first time since the attack. That depends entirely on how you answer their questions. The riders were close enough now that Boone could see their faces. The man in the lead sat straight and tall in his saddle, his dark eyes fixed on the scene before him, a dead mountain lion, 2 Apache women, and a bloodied white rancher standing in the middle of it all. Remember, Ayana said quietly. Answer honestly. Chief Takakoda values truth above all else. But as the riders approached, Boone realized he had no idea what questions they would ask, or whether his honest answers would be enough to keep him alive. The lead rider dismounted with fluid grace, his boots hitting the ground without a sound. He stood nearly a head taller than Boone, with broad shoulders and scars that spoke of countless battles. But it was his eyes that commanded attention, sharp, intelligent, and currently studying every detail of the scene. Ayana, Nayeli. His voice carried relief and authority in equal measure. We heard screams. This man saved us, Itankan, Ayana said, using what Boone assumed was a title of respect. The cat had Nayeli cornered against the rocks. The man they called Itankan circled the dead mountain lion, slowly examining the wounds. 3 deep punctures in the cat's neck showed where Boone's makeshift spear had found its mark. Claw marks in the dirt revealed the struggle. Blood spatter told the story of a desperate fight. You killed this alone? Itankan asked, his attention now fully on Boone. Yes, Boone replied, meeting the man's gaze despite the intimidating presence. With what weapon? Boone gestured to the bent fence post lying nearby. That, and my hands when the post broke. One of the other riders whispered something in Apache. Itankan silenced him with a raised hand. Show me your hands, Itankan commanded. Boone extended his arms. His knuckles were split and swollen, his palms torn from gripping the rough wood. Deep scratches covered his forearms where the cat's claws had raked across his skin during the struggle. Itankan examined the wounds carefully, then looked at the dead animal again. Mountain lions don't usually attack during daylight unless they're desperate or defending territory. Nayeli pulled out the carved bone. We found this beneath her body. Someone was marking this area. Itankan took the bone, studying the symbols carved into its surface. His expression darkened. These markings? They're not Apache. Then who? Ayana asked. Cattlemen from the east, Itankan said grimly. They've been pushing closer to our borders for months. This bone is a land claim marker. Boone felt a chill despite the afternoon heat. He knew the type of man Itankan was describing. Ruthless land grabbers who saw Apache territory as free for the taking. They used intimidation, violence, and sometimes worse, to clear out anyone they considered obstacles. The cat wasn't hunting, Itankan continued. She was protecting her cubs. Someone drove her from her den, forced her into unfamiliar territory where she became desperate. The pieces began falling into place. Boone had heard stories about cattlemen driving predators toward Apache settlements, hoping the resulting conflicts would create reasons for military intervention. "You said the chief knows about me," Boone said carefully. "What exactly does he know?" Itankan studied him for a long moment. "He knows you've refused 3 offers to sell your land to the same cattleman who dropped this marker. He knows you've shared water from your well with Apache families during the drought, even when your own cattle were dying of thirst." Boone was stunned. He had never thought anyone noticed his small acts of kindness, certainly not the Apache chief. "He also knows," Itankan continued, "that you're running out of time." "What do you mean?" "The cattlemen who want your land aren't the type to accept no for an answer. When they can't buy what they want, they find other ways to take it." Ayana stepped forward, worry creasing her features. "That's why we were really here today, not just gathering plants. We were watching for signs of trouble." "Watching my land?" Boone asked. "Protecting it," Naeli corrected. "Our chief sent us to keep an eye on things while he decided what to do about you." "Do about me?" Itankan mounted his horse and looked down at Boone. "Chief Takakota has been watching you for months, trying to determine what kind of man you really are. Today, you gave him his answer." The group began to move, with Ayana and Naeli mounting horses that 2 of the riders had brought for them. But instead of riding away, they waited. "Are you coming?" Itankan asked. "Where?" "To meet the chief. He's been waiting to speak with you." Boone looked back at his small ranch in the distance, then at the dead mountain lion, then at the carved bone that represented a threat he was only beginning to understand. "What if I say no?" Itankan's expression grew serious. "Then you ride back to your ranch alone, and whatever happens next happens without our protection." The choice was clear, but the consequences remained unknown. Chief Takakota wanted to meet the man who had risked everything to save 2 Apache sisters. The question was whether that meeting would seal Boone's fate or be the beginning of something entirely different. Boone mounted the spare horse they offered him, wincing as the movement pulled at his bandaged chest. The animal was well trained, responding to his touch with calm obedience. As they rode away from the scene, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was leaving his old life behind. The Apache settlement lay nestled in a valley, protected by redstone formations that rose like ancient walls around the perimeter. Boone had passed near this area countless times, but had never seen any signs of habitation. Now he understood why. The village was completely hidden from outside view, invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. "How long has your people lived here?" Boone asked Ayana as they descended into the valley. 3 generations, she replied. "My grandfather chose this place because it has everything we need: water, shelter, hunting grounds, and most importantly, protection from those who would drive us away." The settlement consisted of about 30 dwellings, a mixture of traditional Apache structures and more permanent buildings that showed adaptation to prolonged residence. Children played in the central area while women worked at various tasks. Men tended horses in a large corral at the far end of the valley. What struck Boone most was the atmosphere of purposeful activity. This wasn't a temporary camp. It was a thriving community that had learned to blend tradition with practical necessity. "Chief Takakota is waiting by the council fire," Itankan said, pointing toward a gathering area where smoke rose in a steady column. As they approached, Boone saw an older man seated on a simple wooden chair, his weathered hands folded in his lap. Chief Takakota appeared to be in his 60s, with silver-streaked hair and eyes that seemed to take in everything without judgment. He wore practical clothing, leather pants, a cotton shirt, and a beaded vest that spoke of his position without ostentation. "Welcome, Boone Carter," the chief said in clear English as Boone dismounted. "Please, sit." Boone took the offered seat across from the chief, acutely aware that several tribal members had gathered at a respectful distance to observe the meeting. "My daughters tell me you fought a mountain lion with your bare hands to save them," Chief Takakota began. "I used a fence post initially," Boone clarified. "My hands were a last resort when the post broke." The chief nodded approvingly. "Honesty. Good. Tell me, what do you know about the men who want your land?" "Only that they've made 3 offers to buy it, each higher than the last. When I refused the 3rd time, their representatives said they wouldn't ask again." "Do you know why they want that particular piece of land?" Boone shook his head. "It's not good cattle country. Too dry, too rocky. I've barely managed to keep a dozen head alive." Chief Takakota leaned forward slightly. "Your land sits on the most direct route between their eastern holdings and the territory they want to claim here. Without it, they would have to travel an extra 2 days around the mesa formations." The strategic importance became clear. Boone's small ranch wasn't valuable for what it produced. It was valuable for where it sat. "They'll take it one way or another," the chief continued. "Men like these don't accept obstacles. They'll manufacture reasons to remove you, claim you're harboring criminals, or that your cattle are diseased, or that you violated some territorial law they'll invent." "Then why haven't they done it already?" "Because taking land from a white rancher requires justification that satisfies the territorial authorities. Taking land from Apache families requires no justification at all." The brutal honesty of that statement hit Boone like a physical blow. He began to understand why Chief Takakota had been watching him, evaluating him. "You could sell," the chief suggested. "Take their money and start over somewhere else." "I could," Boone agreed. "But I won't." "Why not?" Boone considered the question carefully. "Because it's not right. And because once men like that discover they can intimidate you, they never stop." Chief Takakota studied him for a long moment, then stood and walked to the fire. He picked up a burning stick and drew lines in the dirt at their feet. A rough map of the surrounding territory. "Their land," he said, marking areas to the east. "Their intended expansion," he continued, drawing arrows toward Apache territory. "And your land," he finished, marking a small square directly in the path of those arrows. The visual made the situation undeniably clear. Boone's ranch was the cork in a bottle that these cattlemen desperately wanted to uncork. "What happens if I stay and fight?" Boone asked. "They'll destroy you," the chief replied matter-of-factly. "One man against their resources has no chance." The gathering crowd had grown larger, and Boone noticed they were listening intently to every word. This wasn't just a conversation. It was some kind of evaluation. "But," Chief Takakota continued, "one man fighting alongside others, that changes everything." The implication hung in the air like smoke from the council fire. And Boone realized that everything that had happened today, the attack, the rescue, even this meeting, had been leading to this moment. Chief Takakota erased the lines in the dirt with his boot and returned to his chair. The gathered tribal members moved closer, forming a loose circle around the council fire. Boone sensed this was more than a conversation. It was a formal proceeding. "For 3 months, I have watched you," the chief began, his voice carrying easily to everyone present. "You shared your well water when your own cattle were dying. You helped repair the fence that keeps our horses from wandering onto your land. Even though you received nothing in return, you have shown respect for our boundaries and our ways." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Boone hadn't realized so many of his small actions had been observed and noted. "Today, you risked your life for my daughters without hesitation, without thought of reward or recognition. You fought a mountain lion with nothing but courage and determination." The chief stood again, this time walking to a wooden chest that sat beside his chair. From it, he withdrew a leather document case, its surface worn but well-maintained. "These cattlemen who threaten you also threaten us," he continued. "They want to drive us from this valley, to take our water rights, to force us onto the reservation where we would be dependent on government provisions that arrive late and spoiled. He opened the document case and removed several official-looking papers. But I have something they do not expect. Legal title to this land, granted by the territorial government 15 years ago in exchange for our service as scouts during the Apache Wars. Boone stared at the documents. Legal land ownership by Apache people was rare, almost unheard of in this territory. The cattlemen assume we are squatters who can be removed at will, Chief Takakota explained. They are wrong, but legal ownership means nothing if we cannot defend what is ours. He replaced the documents and closed the case carefully. Your land, though small, controls the only practical route for moving large herds through this region. Without it, their expansion plans become much more difficult and expensive. What are you proposing? Boone asked, though he suspected he already knew. An alliance. You continue to work your ranch, but under our protection. In exchange, you help us defend this valley from those who would take it. The offer was more generous than Boone had dared hope, but he sensed there was more to it. What kind of help? Chief Takakota gestured to Itankan, who stepped forward carrying a rifle, a newer model than anything Boone had ever owned. You can shoot? The chief asked. Yes. But these cattlemen will come with armed men, hired guns who care nothing for law or justice. We need fighters who understand both Apache tactics and white men's ways of thinking. Boone looked around at the faces surrounding him. These people were offering him something he had never had: belonging, purpose, protection. But they were also asking him to potentially fight and kill to defend it. There's something else, Chief Takakota continued, something that makes this alliance even more necessary. He nodded to Nayeli, who stepped forward, holding the carved bone they had found earlier. We sent riders to investigate where this came from, she said. What they found changes everything. The cattlemen aren't just marking territory, Itankan added grimly. They're building a settlement about 10 miles east of here, an armed compound, a supply depot, housing for dozens of men. The implications hit Boone immediately. This wasn't just about land acquisition, it was about a military-style occupation of the entire region. How long before they're ready to move? Boone asked. 2 weeks, maybe 3, Chief Takakota replied. They're waiting for more men to arrive from Texas, and for the legal paperwork they think will give them authority to remove us. Boone felt the weight of the decision settling on his shoulders. Accept the alliance, and he would be committed to a fight that could cost him his life. Refuse, and he would face the cattlemen's threats alone while watching these good people lose everything they had built. If I agree, he said slowly, what exactly would be expected of me? Chief Takakota smiled for the first time since Boone had arrived. First, you would move your cattle here, to our protected valley, where they would have better water and grazing than they've had in years. That alone was worth considering. Boone's animals were barely surviving on his drought-stricken land. Second, you would help us prepare defenses for when the cattlemen come. Your knowledge of their tactics and weapons would be invaluable. And third, the chief's expression grew serious. You would stand with us when the fighting starts, not as a hired gun, but as family. Family. The word carried more weight than any legal document or military alliance. These people were offering him not just protection, but belonging. But before Boone could respond, a young rider galloped into the valley, his horse lathered with sweat and his face tight with urgency. Chief, the rider called out, dismounting quickly. Armed men are approaching Boone's ranch, at least a dozen riders, heavily armed. The moment of decision had arrived sooner than anyone expected, and Boone realized that his choice would have to be made not in the calm of the council fire, but in the heat of immediate crisis. Boone didn't hesitate. I accept your alliance, he said, rising from his chair. But we need to move now. Chief Takakota nodded approvingly. Itankan, gather 12 of our best riders. Boone, You'll guide us to your ranch by the fastest route." Within minutes, the peaceful valley transformed into controlled chaos. Warriors emerged from their dwellings carrying rifles and ammunition. Horses were saddled with practiced efficiency. Women gathered supplies and prepared for the possibility that injured men would return. Ayana approached Boone with a better rifle than the one Itankan had shown him earlier. "This belonged to my husband," she said quietly. "He would want it used to protect family." The weight of that word, family, struck Boone again. These people had just accepted him as one of their own, and now they were preparing to risk their lives to save his failing ranch. "The cattle," Boone said to Chief Takakota as they mounted their horses. "Even if we drive off these men today, my animals won't survive another week on that land without water." "Then we bring them back with us," the chief replied simply. "Tonight." As they rode out of the valley, Boone felt a strange mixture of loss and anticipation. He was leaving behind the solitary life he had known for 3 years, but gaining something he had never dared hope for: a place where he belonged. The journey to his ranch took nearly an hour, riding hard across terrain that Boone had covered countless times alone. Now he moved with a purpose he had never felt before, surrounded by skilled fighters who had chosen to stand with him. As they crested the final ridge before his property, the scene below made Boone's blood run cold. Smoke rose from multiple points around his small homestead. His barn was fully engulfed in flames, and his cabin showed broken windows and a partially collapsed roof. There, Itankan pointed to a group of riders gathered near the remains of Boone's corral. 15 men, armed with rifles. Boone counted his cattle scattered across the property, some lying motionless. The men had killed his animals for sport, destroyed his buildings for intimidation, and were now waiting to see if he would return. "They want you to see this," Chief Takakota observed. "This is their message about what happens to those who refuse their offers." One of the riders below had spotted them on the ridge. Shouts carried across the distance as the group formed up in a defensive line. "What's the plan?" Boone asked, checking his rifle. Chief Takakota studied the terrain below with tactical precision. They chose their position poorly. Good view of the approaches, but no protection from crossfire. He gestured to his men, speaking rapid Apache. Immediately, half the warriors split off, circling wide to the east, while the rest prepared to advance directly. "We're not trying to kill them all," the chief explained to Boone. "We want them to deliver a message back to their employers." "What message?" "That Boone Carter is no longer alone." The attack came with devastating precision. As Chief Takakota's main group rode down the slope in a frontal assault, the flanking warriors opened fire from the eastern ridgeline. Caught between two forces, the cattlemen's hired guns found themselves outmaneuvered and outgunned. The firefight lasted less than 10 minutes. When the shooting stopped, 5 of the raiders lay wounded while the rest had fled, abandoning their injured companions and their equipment. Boone surveyed the wreckage of his property with mixed emotions. Everything he had built over 3 years was destroyed, but somehow he felt more hopeful than he had in months. "Your cattle," Nayeli called out, riding up from the eastern pasture. 7 survived. The rest. She gestured toward the scattered carcasses. 7 animals out of the dozen he had struggled to keep alive. It should have been devastating, but instead, Boone felt relief. 7 cattle were enough to start over, especially with the support and protection he now had. Chief Takakota approached one of the wounded raiders, a young man barely out of his teens who clutched a bullet wound in his shoulder. "Tell your employers," the chief said clearly, "that this land now belongs to the Apache Nation and Boone Carter jointly. Any further trespassing will be considered an act of war." The wounded man nodded frantically, eager to escape with his life. "And tell them," Boone added, surprised by the authority in his own voice, "that the route through this territory is permanently closed to their operations." As they prepared to leave with the surviving cattle, Boone took one last look at the ruins of his old life. The cabin where he had lived in isolation, the barn where he had stored his meager supplies, the corral where he had kept his struggling animals, all reduced to smoke and ash. But as they rode back toward the Apache Valley, Boone realized that Chief Takakota's decision to accept him as family had already begun changing his fate. He was no longer the poor rancher fighting a losing battle alone. He was part of something larger, something worth fighting for, something that would endure long after the cattleman's threats were forgotten. The Apache Valley looked different when they returned. Where Boone had seen a hidden settlement before, he now saw home. The protected pastures, the clear water, the sense of community. Everything his isolated ranch had lacked was here in abundance. His 7 surviving cattle, though thin and stressed from the day's trauma, immediately moved toward the valley stream. For the first time in months, Boone watched his animals drink their fill without worrying about conserving water for tomorrow. "They'll recover quickly here," Ayanna observed, joining him beside the corral. "Good grass, clean water, and protection from predators." "And from men," Boone added, still processing the reality of what had just happened. Chief Takakota approached, carrying the leather document case from earlier. "There is something we must discuss," he said. "The legal aspect of our alliance." They walked to the council fire area where several tribal elders had gathered. Boone recognized the formality of the setting. This was official business. "The cattlemen will not stop because we defeated their hired guns today," the chief began. "They will bring legal challenges, claim we are harboring a criminal, petition the territorial authorities for military intervention." He opened the document case and spread several papers on a flat stone. "But there is a way to protect both you and our people." Boone studied the documents. They were land patents, water rights, and territorial agreements, all bearing official seals and signatures. "You can become a legal partner in our holdings," Chief Takakota explained. "Your name on these documents alongside ours. Your cattle registered as part of our operations. Your residence officially established within our territory." What would that mean? One of the elders, an elderly man with intelligent eyes, leaned forward. "It would mean that any attack on you becomes an attack on legally recognized Apache property. The territorial government would be required to investigate and prosecute. The implications were profound. Instead of being an isolated target, Boone would become part of a legally protected community." "But there's more," Chief Takakota continued. "We need someone who understands both Apache and white culture to represent our interests in territorial affairs, someone who can speak for us in courts and government offices." Boone stared at the chief. "You're offering me a position of authority." "We're offering you a future," Ayanna said simply, "one where your knowledge and courage serve a purpose larger than just survival." Before Boone could respond, hoofbeats echoed from the valley entrance. A scout rode in quickly, dismounting near the council fire with urgent news. "Chief, the cattlemen have sent riders to Fort Brennan," the scout reported. "They're claiming that Apache raiders attacked their peaceful survey team and stole cattle." The twisted version of events shouldn't have surprised Boone, but the audacity still struck him. These men had burned his property, killed his animals, and now they were portraying themselves as victims. "How long before soldiers arrive?" Chief Takakota asked. 2 days, maybe 3. Depends on how many men the fort commander decides to send." The chief stood, his expression grim but determined. "Then we have time to prepare a proper legal defense." He turned to Boone. "This is your final moment to choose. Accept partnership with us and help us fight this battle in courts and council chambers. Or leave now before the soldiers arrive and try to start over somewhere else." Boone looked around the circle of faces. People who had welcomed him, protected him, offered him something he had never imagined possible. The choice wasn't difficult. "I accept," he said firmly. "But I want to understand exactly what we're fighting for." Chief Takakota smiled and gestured toward the valley around them. We're fighting for the right to live peacefully on land we legally own, for the right to defend ourselves against men who use violence and lies to take what they want, for the principle that justice should protect those who honor the law, not those who break it. The elder who had spoken earlier produced a pen and ink. Then we should make this official before the soldiers arrive. As Boone signed his name to the partnership documents, he felt the weight of his decision settling around him like a mantle of responsibility. 3 days ago, he had been a failing rancher with no friends, no future, and no hope. Now he was a legal partner in a thriving community with people who considered him family and a role that gave his life meaning beyond mere survival. But as the sun set over the valley, Boone knew their greatest challenges still lay ahead. The cattlemen would not accept defeat easily, and the arrival of federal soldiers would test everything they had built. "What happens when the soldiers get here?" he asked Chief Takakota. "That depends on whether they come seeking justice or looking for an excuse to remove us," the chief replied. "Either way, we'll be ready." Looking around at the determined faces in the firelight, Boone believed they would be. Chief Takakota's decision to accept him as family had already changed his fate beyond recognition. Now it remained to be seen whether that change would be permanent or whether the forces arrayed against them would prove too powerful to overcome. 2 days later, the sound of approaching horses echoed through the valley. Boone stood beside Chief Takakota at the entrance, watching a column of 8 federal soldiers ride toward them in formation. Leading them was a captain whose weathered face suggested years of frontier experience. "Captain Morrison," Chief Takakota said, recognizing the man. "Welcome to our territory." Captain Morrison dismounted, his hand resting casually on his sidearm. "Chief Takakota, I'm here to investigate reports of Apache raids on civilian surveyors. We're also looking for stolen cattle and a missing white rancher named Boone Carter." "I'm Boone Carter." Boone stepped forward, extending his hand. "And I haven't been missing. I've been right here conducting legal business with my Apache partners." The captain's eyes narrowed as he studied Boone's appearance. Clean clothes, well-fed, obviously unharmed and uncoerced. This clearly wasn't what he had expected to find. "The cattleman who filed the complaint said you were taken against your will after your ranch was attacked," Morrison said carefully. Boone laughed, a sound that carried no humor. "Captain, my ranch was attacked, but not by Apache raiders. It was burned by hired guns working for the same cattlemen who are now claiming to be victims." Chief Takakota stepped forward with the leather document case. "Captain, before we discuss allegations, perhaps you should examine the legal documentation that governs this territory." Morrison opened the case and studied the land patents, water rights, and territorial agreements. Boone watched the captain's expression change as he realized he was looking at legitimate federal documents. "These lands are legally owned by the Apache Nation under territorial authority," the chief explained. "Mr. Carter is now a registered partner in our operations, with all the legal protections that entails." "That may be," Morrison said slowly, "but there are still allegations of cattle theft and assault on civilian surveyors." Boone produced a folded paper from his vest pocket. "Captain, these are the names and descriptions of the men who attacked my property, witnessed by myself and multiple Apache citizens. We're prepared to file formal charges against them for arson, destruction of property, and theft." One of Morrison's sergeants whispered something in his ear. The captain nodded grimly. "The men you describe match known associates of the Baxter Cattle Company," Morrison admitted. "We've had complaints about their methods before." Chief Takakota gestured toward the valley. "Captain, you and your men are welcome to inspect our settlement, count our cattle, and interview any of our people. You'll find no stolen property and no evidence of raids." Morrison accepted the invitation and spent the next 2 hours conducting a thorough investigation. What he found was a well-organized, law-abiding community with detailed records of all livestock and property. "Mr. Carter, the captain said when the inspection was complete. Your cattle, the ones that survived the attack on your ranch, they're here? Legally, Boone confirmed. 7 head, all bearing my brand, all documented in the territorial registry. I can provide witness testimony about how they came to be here. Morrison turned to his men. Sergeant Williams, what did you find in your interviews? Consistent stories, sir. Multiple witnesses confirmed that Mr. Carter's ranch was attacked by armed men who burned his buildings and killed his livestock. The Apache families provided assistance and protection. The captain studied the scene around him. Peaceful families, productive activities, obvious prosperity and stability. This was clearly not a raider camp or a criminal enterprise. Chief Takakota, Morrison said formally, based on my investigation, I find no evidence to support the allegations made against your people. Furthermore, it appears that crimes were committed against Mr. Carter and your community. He turned to Boone. Mr. Carter, I'll be filing a report recommending that territorial authorities investigate the Baxter Cattle Company for criminal activity. You may be called upon to provide testimony. I'll be ready, Boone replied confidently. As the soldiers prepared to leave, Captain Morrison pulled Boone aside. Son, you know this won't end here. The Baxter Company has money and political connections. They'll find other ways to pressure you. Boone looked around at the valley, at the people who had become his family, at the life he was building with purpose and meaning. Captain, 3 days ago I was alone, broke and helpless against men like that. Today I have legal protection, community support, and a role that matters. If they want to keep fighting, they'll discover that everything has changed. Morrison nodded approvingly. Good for you, son. Just be careful. As the soldiers rode away, Boone felt a profound sense of completion. The legal threat was neutralized. His partnership was officially recognized by federal authority, and the cattleman's lies had been exposed. But more importantly, he had proven to himself and everyone else that Chief Takakota's decision to accept him had created something permanent and unshakable. His transformation from isolated failure to valued community leader was now legally and socially established beyond any challenge. 3 months later, Boone stood in the territorial courthouse in the county seat, wearing a clean suit and carrying documents that represented not just his own interests, but those of an entire community. The hearing to officially recognize the Apache Nation's expanded water rights was the culmination of weeks of legal preparation. Mr. Carter, the territorial judge said, you're representing the Apache Nation in this matter. Yes, Your Honor, as their legally appointed advocate and business partner. The transformation was complete in ways Boone had never imagined possible. Where once he had struggled alone to keep a dozen dying cattle alive, he now managed thriving herds that numbered in the hundreds. Where once he had faced each day, wondering if he could survive another week, he now planned months and years ahead with confidence. The Apache Valley had become a model of prosperous cooperation between cultures. Boone's knowledge of territorial law and white business practices, combined with Apache wisdom about land management and water conservation, had created something entirely new in the region. The court recognizes the Apache Nation's petition for expanded water rights, the judge announced after reviewing the documentation. The legal partnership with Mr. Carter's ranching operations provides clear justification under territorial statute. Outside the courthouse, Chief Takakota waited with Ayana and Nayeli. The sisters had become not just friends, but genuine family, often consulting with Boone on matters that bridged the gap between Apache and white communities. How did it go? Ayana asked. Complete victory, Boone replied, unable to suppress his satisfaction. Full water rights recognized, our land boundaries confirmed, and a legal precedent established for other Apache communities. Chief Takakota nodded approvingly. Your people will benefit from this as much as ours. Legal water rights mean security for everyone in the region. As they prepared for the journey home, a familiar figure approached from across the street. Captain Morrison, now in civilian clothes, walked over with obvious purpose. "Mr. Carter, Chief Takakota," he said, tipping his hat respectfully. "I wanted you to know that the investigation into the Baxter Cattle Company concluded yesterday." "And?" Boone asked. "Federal charges for conspiracy, arson, and attempted theft of territorial lands. 3 of their men are already in custody, and the company's territorial licenses have been revoked. Justice had been served. But more importantly, the legal victory established a protection that would endure long after the individual criminals were forgotten." "There's something else," Morrison continued. "The territorial governor has asked me to extend an invitation. He wants to meet with you both about establishing a formal mediation service for land disputes involving Apache communities. The offer represented recognition at the highest levels of government. Acknowledgement that the partnership between Boone and Chief Takakota had created something valuable and permanent. The journey back to the valley took them past the site of Boone's old ranch. Where his cabin and barn had once stood, new grass now grew. His old corral had been dismantled, its lumber used to build structures in the Apache settlement. But as they rode past, Boone felt no sadness for what had been lost. That isolated, struggling existence seemed like another man's life entirely. "Do you ever regret it?" Nayeli asked, following his gaze toward the empty land. "Giving up your independence to become part of our community?" Boone considered the question seriously. "I thought I was independent before," he said finally. "But I was just alone. Real independence comes from being strong enough to help others and having people you can depend on when you need help." As they crested the ridge overlooking the Apache Valley, Boone saw the thriving community spread out below. Children played in the central area while their parents worked at various tasks. The large corral held dozens of healthy cattle. His original 7 animals had multiplied under proper care, and now formed the foundation of a prosperous herd. Most importantly, he saw home. Not just a place to survive, but a place where he belonged, where his skills and knowledge mattered, where he could build something lasting. Chief Takakota's decision changed everything, he said, speaking to himself as much as to his companions. "It was the right decision," the chief replied simply. "A man who will risk his life for others without thought of reward will fight just as hard to protect what he loves." As they rode into the valley, Boone realized that the poor rancher who had fought a mountain lion to save 2 Apache sisters was gone forever. In his place was a respected community leader, legal advocate, and proud member of a family that extended far beyond blood relations. Chief Takakota's decision had indeed changed his fate forever, not through magic or luck, but through the simple recognition that courage and honor, when properly supported and channeled, could transform not just an individual life, but an entire community. The setting sun painted the valley in golden light, illuminating a future that stretched ahead with purpose, prosperity, and the unshakable knowledge that he would never again face the world alone. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable Western tale where courage and destiny collide in ways you never expected. Don't forget to subscribe and consider a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to us.